Okay, it is 1 o'clock, so I think we'll get started. Today I'm just going to hand you straight over to my esteemed colleague, who will tell us about the manuscripts, I think, from Ipswich, and then we'll discuss it.
Yes, so the piece we're going to have a look at today is a rather unusual setting of the credo format. So lots of words in the credo. This is a piece dating from about 1400, and it survives in a manuscript which is now glamorously in the Suffolk Record Office in Ipswich. And it's part of a 2 bifolio, so 2 sort of just basically openings like that, from the same manuscript. And in one of those, in one opening, we have this wonderful credo. Now, the piece of paper that I've given you there, I will explain a little bit later, but I think probably the best thing is if we just give you a blast of this first. We won't sing the whole thing now, but just give you a flavour of how it sounds, how it kind of works. Sonority of this piece. Well, we've got 4 parts. 2 of them have no text at all. So we are just extrapolating from the chant on which this is based. Some words, basically we're singing most of the time. And these 2 parts take the text in very syllabic form, but they exchange the role of sometimes vocalizing and sometimes articulating the text. Again, in the manuscript, there are great gaps of no text at all. The sonority is very rich, isn't it? It's beautifully sort of what we call triadic, so full triadic chords, rather than what we associate with some medieval music, which is bare fifths. So that's a feature, particularly of English music at this time. Now, we don't know who the composer of this piece is. It's anonymous, but the piece is based on a tenor, which is what Matthew is singing. Well, first of all, just to explain, a tenor is not a tenor voice, it's a function. So his function is to hold the cantus firmus part, i.e. the part which has been borrowed from chant. And the chant that we think this comes from, although It's not exact by any means. Is this chant for? Actually, it says here the second matins responsory of the first nocturne for the Sunday following 11th of September. So not actually far away, which is called Omni Tempora Benedicteum. And some of the contours of that chant can be found in Matthew's part, and indeed on that slip of paper that you've got there. What attracted the composer to this chant? Well, it might be that he really wants to write a piece for the second responsory of the 11th of September, and because Omni Tempora also says something about the structure of the piece itself. And that's actually kind of, in a way, the most interesting thing about this whole piece. Because what's happening in the lower parts is that this tune, which is presented here only once, is being repeated over and over again in different time signatures, effectively different time signatures. Now, the time signatures aren't given to you. You just have to kind of work it out, yeah? And presumably someone told the singer, right, this is how it works. Maybe there was a canon or an instruction as to how to realise it. But that's all that the tenor gets. And what the tenor then has to do is to read that according to different time signatures. And the effect of that is of a diminution or a speeding up of the time. So first of all, what's your first note, Matthew? What's that do? So it'd be, he was singing da, 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 da. Yeah, you can follow it there up on that piece. And then just as we stopped, he was starting to go da, 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 da. Later on in the piece, he is going to be going da, 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 and later still da, 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 and later still da, 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 sorry, da, 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 and finally da, 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 like that. Okay, so that part speeds up, and you're going to hear that when we get to the Amen. Basically, that's when we're really at full velocity in all the parts. So, you know, in this music, it's often quite difficult to sort of confect a climax, but this composer definitely knows how to write a climax. In fact, and I won't get into the complications of it, he's done all sorts of other things to make it all work so that the Amen is absolutely a sort of, you know, a terminal velocity. What else can I say about it? Well, one other thing I might just say, and I'm going to switch this on now because otherwise I'll forget. This is a piece called. There's a word, modern word, to designate the style of piece that this is, and it's called isorhythmic. So isorhythmic means that the same rhythm appears over and over again. Well, that's certainly the case, as I've already demonstrated, because Matthew is repeating that tune, and that obviously also that rhythm over and over again, albeit reading it in a different way. But actually, if you look at your slip of paper, you may find that you see patternings which recur. So, I think the best way of doing this is if you can spot the the lines, the vertical lines. Those vertical lines are rests, yeah? And what we've got there is dum, bum, 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 2, 3, rest, 2, 3. Dum, bum, 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 bum. Now that represents then the end of a segment. The end of a segment. And that rhythmic material repeats. So we're now dum, 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 bum, 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 rest, dum, bum, 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 bum. That's the end of another segment. And then dum, 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 rest, dum, 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 dum. So there are, in that tune that I've given you, there are 3 statements of the same rhythm. Yeah? And so the structure of this is in fact that you've got one tune which is divided into 3, where the rhythm repeats. Yeah? And that whole section, so that whole tripartite structure, is then repeated in a different time signature, and then repeated again, and then repeated again. In fact, 6 times. Yeah? No, is that right? 8 times. Yeah. So this is architecture in music. I mean, it's the most amazing kind of artifice, really, that the composer brings to this piece. And yet, when you hear it, you may sense something of the ingenuity going on behind it. But actually, I think, and one certainly hears the speeding up. But it's that sense that something's clever's going on, but actually, also, let's just enjoy the surface sonority. I think it's that interaction and listening between knowing something's clever and being satisfied enough to feel that that's, there is a composition or brilliance going on, but then also just sitting back and enjoying the ride. Okay? So how about we now give you the full ride. I wish I could make it work.
It's got the cantilevered building vibe, right? It's how it is held up.
That might be.
I'm sure that it does that.
I think it's because it must be something to do with that. Well, actually, I mean, whilst we're waiting to see if this will work, I might just say that this is part of a sort of longer project that members of this group are doing on music from this period. So there's an enormous amount of anonymous music from the early 15th century. Much of it residing either in places like the Suffolk Record Office or on the continent, which is barely known. It remains in dusty volumes, rigorously edited by brilliant scholars, but doesn't really hear the light of day because anon simply doesn't sell, I'm afraid. You need to have a name to sell an album. And this I'm very surprised to see is not recorded. This seems to me to be a very important one. And one final detail is about actually the nature of the manuscript. So this is a manuscript. Oh, very good. We are on business. This is a manuscript which music of this kind is ephemeral and it's discarded. Once it was 20 to 30 years old, it was torn up and used for other things, more useful things like pasting down and supporting the binding of accounts and things like the accountant was always without, right? And pasting down the bindings of these things. But very cleverly, people have managed to lift these parchments or paper sources off from out of the bindings and even read the music. And this source is one of those. Right, we are now at so. Credo in Deum.
This is very inauthentic. of curious or that you're interested in?
Are you moving it off this, or have you got proper
So we have this.
motivation?
I will show you.
We are reading.
We are reading from this, which is the modern version. Now you can decide whether you think one is easier than the other. In some ways, this is actually a lot easier than this. But apart from that, it is. There's a lot of information. There's little visual stimulator.
I think the original is just a bit too faint and sort of jaded to really work from. And we do love working from sources, but I think in less time, this one will be good.
How would you talk about the source material in the registry office?
You know what? I've got to fess up. None of this is my own original, research. I mean, the only originality about this is the fact that we're singing it, which is actually pretty original. Because I don't know, even other specialist groups who have worked and done brilliant work in this area, I don't think I've seen any work, any recording of this. But there is a very substantial essay on this piece by a scholar called Margaret Bett. The fragment was discovered, well, it was first catalogued by Andrew Wathy, I think, in the 1980s. And that time, this was the first time they were starting to look at these fly leaves and look at these findings and find there's a whole load of 14th century material, a bit earlier than this, then collectively known as the Worcester fragments, which come from the bindings. Very sort of ephemeral art from.
A lot of them seem to be being found as a line of wallpaper at the moment.
Yes, that laundry list, that sort of thing,
Very much so. Anything else?
How do you think, so like you were saying that music is often kind of torn up or just kind of redone after 20 or 30 years, how do you think that would have an impact on, do you think that should have an impact on how we perform it today? Or
Well, I mean, I think what it reminds us or tells us is that, as I say, musical aesthetics in the early, in the late and Middle Ages and early Renaissance was a very absolutely sort of prioritised modernity. So there's a famous quotation which I use in all my first year lectures from a theorist called Tinctorius, who was writing in the 1470s, and he said that anything written more than 40 years before the 1470s was not worth listening to. Yeah. So in fact, a piece like this he would regard as barbarous if he ever knew it. He wouldn't know it. So which is so different, I mean, quite the opposite of how we think today. Sometimes we think, oh God, I can't listen to anything written in the last 40 years, and it's way too clinical or whatever, and so we prioritise music from an earlier age. So it's kind of reversal of that. So in terms of your question, I mean, I think one might try and calibrate one's ears to the newness of this music, and not be thinking, oh well, this is obviously derives from music from the 13th, or earlier. There is a kind of experimentalism or innovation about this sound world, which I think, as performers, we should try and devote and talk to.
I think if anything, we have a kind of duty to compare it more so than our notions on classical music nowadays to our notions on pop music. So, for example, Tinctorius' 40-year comment, 1470. Nowadays, that would probably resemble 14 days with regards to pop music. This is 40 days old. It was just a lightning pace nowadays. So, within the pop music, because as soon as something becomes a historical artifact, then we review it differently. One of the things that we do have available to us now, which we didn't have, is this. And so one of the fantastic things that we're trying to do is to document this kind of stuff, because an oral record is hugely important. So being able to record it is something that people hadn't had the facility to do previously, to actually get it down in its oral form. We have this, and we're lucky to have this, but we probably miss out on
Absolutely
however many thousands of pieces because it's been destroyed or lost or whatever it might be. And so it's very sadly when you have this kind of wonderful music and it sits there and we don't document it, because it would not take much. If there is one copy of it, and for whatever reason there is a fire, as there has been many a time over the course of history, and then this is burned, then it's gone, as it were. So, if you have a recording, then there are very clever people nowadays who maybe if they had a recording could transcribe it and be able to make an edition of it if we did know music. So that I think is a relatively important thing to add.
Just one question. You say the piece is really innovative because of the, well, in part due to the kind of the way it gets more and more rhythmic it gets. Would it be possible, and you say Margaret Benz has written a paper on this, would it be possible to kind of contextualise that? Are there any other composers that we know of, or any composers at all that we know of, that were writing in a similar style, or anyone prior to that in the 14th century that would have been writing music that could have inspired or even could have been written by the same person?
Yes. Well, this fits into a sort of tradition, an English circle of composition, much of which is contained within a manuscript called the Old Hall manuscript from slightly later than this, and which has some of these very clever kind of compositional strategies. I mean, the whole business of isorhythm and diminution and all this is something that we come across in continental music from previous to it. So that in itself is not the innovative aspect of this. Where this composer pushes the boundaries is how rigorous he is about it, how it plays out over a number of different segments rather than normally it's just three. And actually there is another thing, very briefly to explain, that actually our parts are not the only ones that are isorhythmic. In fact, these two parts are as well, but in a slightly more fluid way, so the composer actually is very keen to have that amen being the moment where it all kicks off, right? So in order to delay, in order not to blow, the joy of that moment, he actually fixes this top part, adds an extra breathe at a certain point, so that no one all comes together at the same time until the beginning of the amen. And it's very nice that this is not a piece which is just, you could imagine this piece as like a piece of clockwork, and you just and you wind it up and it just goes, and that's how it is. No, he's controlling it all the time. It's a bit more like my wise PhD supervisor once said, this music is much more like tunnelling and putting up the struts as you go than building scaffold and building and there's an element of sort of working it out as you go on.
There's an element of the beauty in a lack of understanding, if that makes sense. Like being able to oralize something. So it seems very simple in a lot of ways, and underneath the huge amount of complexity. Well, like the wall in Florence or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Somebody wondering how that's actually staying up. If you knew the magic trick, then you might find it a little bit less exciting in a way. But it's
Yeah, I mean, I think you hear it in Bach or other great music. You know that this is great, clever stuff, and that gives you joy, even if you don't quite understand.
There's also an art, isn't there, in actually being able to do that and make it sound good at the same time, because there are certain pieces which are very, very clever from an academic standpoint, but which orally just don't quite have the same punch. Right, this spars the line really well. It manages to do both. There are a few pieces probably from this period where you would say that they really hit the mark in that sense. Yeah. But there are also pieces which don't, because you can get overly obsessive about the process, and then it doesn't quite come across in the performance element of it. Whereas this, I think, is one of those that really marks it.
are you approaching it mainly from the surface level as a sound, or do you really try to get across this rhythmic notion, this kind of coloring out there?
I think one of these guys.
Well,
Got a line in, so you take this one.
Oh, that's very good of you.
I mean, I suppose just from the start, just making myself aware of the structures that are happening and the specific points. I mean, musically, it's pretty easy to hear, as you're singing through it, it's pretty easy to hear where there are sections. Like you'll hear repetitions of harmonic ideas and harmonic ideas. I mean, I suppose, with this one, I guess Edward has been more analytical than we have going into it. So just making myself aware of what's happening underneath.
I think if you, sorry, you can.
No, it's fine. I mean, I don't know about analytical, but it's very different music to sing from standard workshop. I mean, if you've heard of Nick and I, we're not really singing melodic lines, but we're just basically kind of declaring the creed. And so it's sort of more of a computational approach. We were actually saying earlier as well that we're trying not to sound that nice, to be honest, and it's more of a kind of kind of cutting sound.
I'm something to say about the mensuration of this kind of stuff is that I think generally it tends to work best when you can't hear the changes are seamless. So it's all going on underneath, but you don't. As soon as you start trying to force this music to comply, it tends to go the other way, as it were. So there is an element to understanding, getting your head around it, being able to then function without having to work too mathematically, which requires you, ironically, to work mathematically an incredible amount beforehand, to then get yourself to a place where you don't have to think numerically, you can just declaim the text, as it were. And then suddenly the mathematical equations just slip and slide into place, so you don't have to force anything to comply, and that's a lot more easier on the ear than when you have to make something work, you have to force things in. I mean, no conducts, obviously, so that gives you enough indication as to that. Fab, I think that is probably enough neural overload for one day. We will go, as it were, to Kenzion, as we always do, for a little coffee, and if you've got any questions which you think of, I think we'll all be down there and happy to chat about anything music related. Please go and find us.
If you're in Cambridge for longer than just today, we do these workshops every week. So next week there will be some willing volunteers from our Cambridge Own Music Consult session tomorrow, and basically there'll be students who are new to this style of singing, and basically we'll just be putting them through their paces a little bit, but just being getting them interested in this music. So if you want to hear some of that, please do come back.
And just before we go, if we wouldn't mind just a little round of applause for everybody putting this together.